All right, well, welcome everyone. I hope you have been enjoying the Wildness Symposium so far, some of the events that you've been able to go to despite the freezing wind outside and the crazy weather from yesterday. This afternoon, I have the pleasure to introduce two artists to you who actually, it seems, have quite a bit in common. They are both poets. They've both spent time in Alaska. They both are interested in expressing nature and culture in various ways. And they both have skills other than writing. So it's kind of going to be a little bit of an interdisciplinary presentation. So it should be pretty interesting. Ken Waldman is a writer, a poet, and a fiddler. Is that correct? Fiddler? Fiddleist? Fiddler? Okay. He's spent 20 years living in Alaska, and his writing and fiddle music have been shaped by the culture and the environment of that place. Since 1994, he's been working full-time as Alaska's fiddling poet, performing at schools and events across the nation. We're going to actually start off with Ken and then end with him. And in the middle, we will have Paul Brook, who currently lives in Ames and teaches at Grandview College in Des Moines. His writing is based on environmental issues and scientific observation. Cultural interests include the Lakota people and language, and currently he's working on a biography entitled Ash of the Dragonfly, The Life History of a Lakota Woman. He will read and show slides from his recent book of poetry, Light and Matter. So please join me in welcoming Ken and Paul.
Anybody here last night for Brenda Peterson's keynote? And prior to that, I was filling in for the flute player who wasn't able to come, so I was there from 7:45 with some folks from north of town, David Lozier and Mary Schaefer Lozier. So Karen, just play the mandolin, I'll play a fiddle tune for you, and then I'll start doing a few poems. It's the first tune I ever started playing. I started playing in my mid-20s outside Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I used to teach tennis, and I had a great trade one summer. This has nothing to do with the wild or wilderness, but we'll get to that, is that except maybe the inner thing of trying to do something different, where I taught tennis. There was a fellow who had a music shop who wanted to get in shape. I ran him around on the tennis courts on Wednesdays. Then we would go to his fiddle shop, and he'd show me fiddle tunes. And this is the first really fiddle tune that I ever learned, called Over the Waterfall. And then this is not going to be a typical wilderness poem, but it's one that I'm going to find from this book here. I wasn't even sure I was going to read this. And then I like to find commonalities. I didn't know you spent time up in Alaska. We'll have to talk a little bit about that. And or say something, and I'll do in the last little 15 minutes, I'll do something, maybe in respect to that. But it's great being here in Ames. I had never been through Ames. And last April, I had work in Minnesota. And I was driving through, and I go, I'm kind of close. So I stopped by and was wandering Ross Hall, and I ran into Steve Pett at about 5:30 or 6 o'clock on a Thursday night, who invited me to visit a seminar. And I'd never met Steve before, but I knew him and Deb also because they were editing Flyway, and I've had a number of poems in Flyway. So I want to share a poem that's kind of, I have a connection to Ames before being here. So this is one called Stutterer. It goes like this. And some of you, I have cards. I read a whale poem last night for Brenda Peterson. It's in one of the books, and this is in a book, but I also have these cards, and the cards are free to take. So here's a poem originally in Flyway, Stutterer. Valedictorian, despite the near-crippling speech impediment that aroused snickers from insensitive classmates, the stutterer took the microphone at graduation, smiling like a master conjurer about to produce a rabbit. And true enough, next moment, a beautiful girl no one had seen before wheeled herself to the podium, shook the stutterer's hand, then spoke to the assemblage about the trampoline accident that fractured her spine, its difficult weeks of pain and denial, the long grieving, the slow recovery, the final time she felt like killing herself, the stigmas and challenges of disability, the compassionate, hard-won love she held for humanity, because all were fellow sufferers, and concluded by rising from her chair, embracing the stutterer fiercely before flapping once like a raven and disappearing into his breast. It's nice. I can read these, and people who do things publicly, I tend to do things on the fly. I don't have set lists, which was great last night with David and Mary, because they say, well, we don't work with set lists either. So, and I read that, and I just went, oh, I wanted to read this poem, and I would have forgotten. And mentioning the raven and birds, this is one called Past Milepost 135. As I was driving up yesterday through the cavalierly, I got my Alaska mentality. I was like driving, I got to Cameron, Missouri, and I drove yesterday morning before, I guess, the jackknife truck prevented people from getting here. I got here. But I was looking, I go, oh yeah, I'm at mile this, mile that, and it helps because, I'm getting closer to Des Moines, which would get me closer to Ames, and I got here. And in Alaska, there's a road between Fairbanks and Anchorage and Fairbanks, the Parks Highway. It's the two big cities in the state, and they're not that. Anchorage is 350,000 people. Fairbanks, where I went to grad school, is about 80,000. And it's, for some of it's not only two-lane, and it's two biggest cities. It's not like going, from Des Moines to, Iowa City or something on I-80. You're not on I-80 in the Parks Highway. And there's mileposts, and there's actually a whole book, mileposts, that just everything, like every mile, what you might see and what you might do. So I have a poem called Past Milepost 135. Drowsing, I swerved and barely missed a bear cub crossing the Parks Highway, its wilder stretch between Talkeetna and Cantwell. 4 more hard hours to Fairbanks. I veered into the next wide shoulder, slept, woke to a stranger tapping the windshield, pointing to a double rainbow arched over Denali. I mumbled thanks, pushed myself up out of the seat, stood, and watched the sky pull color apart like taffy, while Denali, that big old mountain of mountains, rose like the iceberg king, shrugging sea level and humanity. Breathing in the giant animal power of this place, I settled once more at the wheel and smelled the cool July air, then spun onto blacktop and took off like a goshawk into the midnight pinks. My CD, I play a fiddle tune to that. CDs aren't out there, but I have them here, and I have them tonight too, and I got a van full of them. I got 6 CDs. That poem's on one, and I don't even remember what tune I played with it, but I'll play a tune just to play something, and I'll do a few more poems. It's one called Sandy Boy's West Virginia tune. And I'll do this one and then that one. Maybe have time for one more. Who here's a student here in program? I was a grad student, and this mentions something somebody said to me when I was a student. poetry professor. And I should say this too, because I was a fiction writer in my graduate program. And I got my best lessons from other grad students because there was the main poetry professor. You're a good fiction writer. You are not a poet. Don't be writing these poems. Please save us from that. I exaggerate, but he just said, you're not a poet. You're a good fiction writer. Write stories. So I kind of went, well, I'll show you. So here's this poem that kind of alludes to some of that. It's called "This Day, Barrow," and I did this last night too. I made a little map. Here's Fairbanks. Here's Anchorage. Here's Juneau, our state capital. It's not Des Moines. I mean, you can only get there by boat or plane. By the way, here's Ames all the way there. But here's Juneau. I taught in Sitka, and then there's Nome over here, and Barrow is up on the ceiling. That's where the Arctic Ocean is and where you might be reading about polar bears these days. So the poem, "This Day, Barrow." Almost noon, moon over tundra, light shining on sea ice. I say, beautiful to myself, aware that if I were to write it, one ex-professor would say, explain it, what gives you the right? And the chorus of editors would complain, nothing original or new. Ah, but it is beautiful, I repeat, as I watch the tip of dawn sway the dark, another night being peeled layer by layer. Beautiful, beautiful, I think, going back to my business, which is to seek out far horizons, then record their favorite word. I indulged myself last night. If you missed it, I was with David Lozier, Mary Schaefer Lozier, and played a waltz, told a story about how when I taught writing in Nome, we had a party, and I taught over telephone, so it was kind of like a talent show. And that was a cue that I could play the fiddle, and David and Mary got to show off. They clogged, did some things, and one of the things I shared was, I'll do this tomorrow, and I may do it later, and in addition. But I have this, "As the World Burns," the sonnets of George W. Bush and other poems of the 43rd presidency. And I should not be reading this at the Wild, symposium, but I will. A lot of the poems are in his voice. It says they're all sonnets. It's commentary sonnets. I start out with watching The Daily Show, and I wrote a Jon Stewart voice poem. I have a lot of voice poems I've written. But then I wrote an Abu Ghraib poem. I wrote a poem about Laura Bush. It has some interesting stuff, and then, at least to me, interesting. And then I started writing a few in his voice, and I started channeling him. And I wrote a lot of poems in his voice. And this one is called George W. Bush on Anwar, so it kind of fits. So George W. Bush on Anwar, and for those counting 14 lines, about 10 syllables with rhyme scheme and everything else. The Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Certainly that's one place we ought to drill. We need oil, and experts say it'll spill out the tundra there. This is something huge inside our lands. No Middle East excuse to hold us hostages. It makes me ill when I hear it's $55 to fill a tank. I've been elected twice to choose the country's direction, and no one wants these high gas prices. This affects us all. It's a simple issue. Let me be blunt. Drilling is essential. We need more oil. This wasteland is reserved for me and you, not just for, what are they called? Caribou? I apologize. I'll play a fiddle tune and then cede the place here to Paul, and then I'll get this out of the way because he's got a lot of stuff. I'll play a waltz, and then if I'm sufficient memory, I'll start playing the waltz in a half hour, and it'll be kind of like seamless in its own way. This is a waltz. I have friends in Louisiana, Mitch and Lisa Reed, have a daughter, Renee. Everybody in Louisiana, it's like Miss. So I have a landlady who's 93, Miss Gussie, and this is like Miss Renee's waltz for the 8-year-old. So. yes, and kind of like I'm still Alaska's Fiddling Poet when I need to be. But I drove up from there.
So when you're in Alaska, where are you?
Officially Anchorage, but I'm not there much, but I'll be there in end of May, early June. If I get that out of the way there, Paul, too, I'll
No, you're good. You're good.
let me get all this. Should I get that out of the way?
No, I think you're good. I'm there. Actually, why don't you hit the lights? I think it might just be better. Well, actually, this is a good segue. When I was 21 years old, I actually was flown to, Prudhoe Bay, which is up near some of the places we're talking about. If you look on the map, it's right here, right there. And I was dropped in the tundra to do migratory bird research for 3 months. And at the time, I was a 21-year-old junior at Iowa State studying fisheries and wildlife biology. And that moment for me, being in Alaska, was sort of transcendent because, it was transcendent because at that time, I had never spent that much time in the wild on my own. And so what it did for me was I learned about photography. I learned how to watch nature respectfully, and it led me to become, I guess, the writer I am today. So Alaska in that way, even though I was only there for 3 months, was really transformative. And I flew over Anwar. I was doing a survey. I got really lucky. One day I was in camp by myself, and this pilot came, and he said, "Would you like me to help me do a survey?" And I said, "Sure." And I said, "What are we doing?" He said, "We're going to fly over Anwar. We're going to do a bird count." And by the way, it's very difficult to do on a plane. I'd never done it before. But I learned very quickly. And I remember at one moment we were flying over Anwar in the plane, and I was watching the herds of caribou migrating through, and a peregrine falcon, we flew over the top of it. And just for a second, you were just magically over the bird, looking down on top of it. It was just unbelievable. So Anwar, Alaska, certainly a connection for me. What I'm going to do is read today, and you're going to see images rolling on the screen, and these are all images that come from the book, essentially, or images that sort of drive the poems. And after we're done today, if you have any questions about what comes up on the screen, I'll certainly answer them for you. The first poem I want to read today is actually a poem called Fur of the Mole. And I was in my front yard one day. My wife was out of town, and she asked me to transplant some wild columbine. And as I was doing that, a mole came up and showed itself. And by the way, moles, fascinating, kind of creepy looking, but very soft. So this is a poem, and this is a Malaysian pantoum. So you're going to hear 2 lines repeated in the next stanza on down. Here it is. While I was transplanting wild columbine, a mole poked his nose out of his burrow. Lately, my writing hasn't been going well. There are constant intrusions, interruptions. A mole poked his nose out of his burrow. I had a choice, my hands or the pitchfork. There are constant intrusions, interruptions. My mind isn't right. I doubt my words. I had a choice, my hands or the pitchfork. I chose my hands and uprooted him. My mind isn't right. I doubt my words. I don't believe anyone will ever read my work. I chose my hands and uprooted him. I never knew how strangely beautiful a mole was. I don't believe anyone will ever read my work. The mail keeps bringing generic rejections. I never knew, oh, you know it. I never knew how strangely beautiful a mole was, with his sleek chrome fur and paddled claws. The mail keeps bringing generic rejections. Writer friends have new books and readings. With his sleek chrome fur and paddled claws, the mole deserves to master the underground. Writer friends have new books and readings, while I find countless ways of distracting myself. You'll see this, the image of the mole later, and we got to the end. I was getting to the end creating the book, and what I needed to do was find one more image, and I needed a picture of a mole. By the way, if you want to photograph a mole, they're not readily available. They're very difficult. So we actually had to take a picture of a frozen mole, and it was very embarrassing. He had died an untimely death and was in our freezer. So that, if you see the picture of the mole, he's frozen, and my wife is holding it. That is true love. Why was it in the free? I keep, those are my days of, science days. I would keep everything. I have a mink and other stuff. And you never know when you might need something like that. You might, a party favor, or perhaps, donate it to the Conservation Center. The next poem is actually called Filchers, and when I grew up as a kid in southwest Iowa, I watched a lot of family farms go under, and it was really hard to watch, mostly because I realized how important they were to family and sort of upbringing. And so I really wanted to do a poem. This is based on this is called a Cosbard, and it's an Irish form, and it's some of my background. So I picked up on this form, and you probably saw the image already. There's like an old farmhouse, and you actually go into these farmhouses, and they just tear everything out of them, you know. And yeah, those are some foxes. These are taken right by Iowa State University. There's a series of them, so you'll see them all. They're pretty darn cute. So this is called Filchers. And to filch something is to steal it or to take it. Okay. Cursed badgers burrow under the upheaved floors. Hares mess the boards and stairs. Creatures stir when we enter the fetid farmhouse. We have stopped to filch beams and lost antiquities. We scope out cupola, attic, and walls with axe and hammer. Hopeful with each swing we might find a fine old hoard, some buried coin, but nothing is left behind. This house, I now believe, lies keeled over, a sunken ship, a bit dry, blowing to powder among prairie grasses, slipping and losing to pull's power. We unhinge the handmade doors, undock brass fixtures, unload mast-sized beams out of the floors, uncover strips of old oak, leaving the great shape to smolder 40 more years, still witness to the old wreck, reminder of farms foreclosed and cursed. Oh, by the way, this picture here, for some reason, they allowed me to lay on the ground next to them for like 20 minutes. Don't know how or why. It was one of those magical moments, you know. And I actually had my macro lens on, which is unusual. Usually I shoot with a 500 millimeter, so I'm really far away. Try not to get too intrusive. But for some reason, this particular fox was sort of like fascinated by me. And then after that day, I never saw him again. So, yeah, I'm probably 4 feet away at that point taking that picture. One of the things I do I have a lot of hobbies. That's just what I do. But one of the hobbies I have is water gardening, and in our backyard I have lots of water plants. And early in my career as a water gardener, I thought you had to take them out every year and put them in the basement. So, you know, I do a lot of weightlifting. That's another hobby I have, arm wrestling, whatever. But this was a hobby that was getting really kind of backbreaking, because when these water lilies grow, they get bigger and bigger, and pretty soon they weigh like 100. They're heavy, you know, and they're full of water. So it's very difficult. So I began to imagine what it would be like in about 30 years when I didn't have any strength left, and I had to, the pond's just really going to pot, so not literally pot, you know what I mean. This is called Monet's Water Gardeners, and this is also an Irish form. It's called a Runiac Charid, and this is a quatrain stanza. You'll hear the repetition in it, and essentially this is my take on water lilies. There's one right there. It's actually from the back of my backyard pond. His lilies wait inside to miss the freeze, in black bags in the basement, clipped and bent, anxious to squeeze up tendrils of stalks and dozens of thrills for the water gardener whose age has whittled his skill. He'd go wading, preening each plant, removing brown growth, deadheading spent blooms, dusting luminous, stunning even himself with the results. Those whims had to end. The gardener remembers Monet, the brim of his wide hat nodding on the bankside as he prepared his brushes and his crushed paints. The boat slides by. Monet's pond workers stop for the day. The boat is crammed with offal. Beautiful lily rafts sway. The water gardener sadly ponders the scene. The leaves are decayed and yellow. The flowers are brown corpses, floating face down. His senses cannot ignore the eyesores, the deformed look of lilies. The next poem is called Light and Matter, and there is a new development recently in Ames. If you live there, I apologize. But I would go by there it is right there. How fortuitous. And this picture we actually took at night. My wife was with me. I did a 30-second exposure on it to get the stars in the picture, and then also get the reflection in the water. And so that was an important picture to take. We were outside. It took a long time to get the picture, but then finally it came. And it's kind of, it takes a lot of patience because you want it to come out. Of course, you're sitting there waiting for 30 seconds each time you hear the camera whirring, and then you're worrying, et cetera. So this is called Light and Matter, and this is my fear of what could happen to my life. A couple builds a glass house near a river. It is lit like a small city driven by unlimited wattage. Their lives are all frenetic energy, electrons bouncing in constricted space. No children, 2 black sobs, no pets, 14-hour-a-day jobs, frozen dinners consumed at different times, television, bed, never sex, only arguments. Each fight ignites the eventual implosion. Each night they sink into themselves like collapsing stars, saying not a word, slipping into silence, into absolute nothingness. It's a happy poem, I know. On a lighter note, I'm going to read one called Ephemerals, and if you're waiting for spring like I am, this poem is just describes wildflowers in spring, and some of these flowers only last for a day, in their beauty, and so this is actually a trout lily, based on a trout lily, but they tend to last a bit longer than that. So, and I don't know if you grew up in farm country. I know Deb, you grew up in farm country. I don't know if you had these people who would come up to you on the side of the road, like you're outside at a party, and they'd be drinking, and they have the beer between their legs. You ever see that in the country? Deb's going, no, I have no idea what you're talking about. Well, anyway, here we go. Oh, how I wait for them beneath the snowmelt, bright cousins appearing unexpectedly at a reunion, driving up the gritty roads in sleek green cars, cans of beer hidden between their legs, the bitter nectar helping them to blaze incandescent in their short, bursted lives. Oh, there was a mole. Did you see the mole? Did he look frozen? Yeah, okay. Yeah, he wasn't a healthy mole. It was, I put some dirt on him to make him look better, but I feel so bad. But he had a good life until I stepped on him accidentally. I feel really terrible, but it's quite tragic. But anyway, and I have a nice mink if anyone's interested. But anyway, we did have a mink that lived by our pond, and he systematically basically ate all my koi. So I thought it was great. I liked him. But then he just disappeared. I think he got run over, so it's very sad. But I like to have animals in my yard. It's great fun to watch. So the next one is actually called The Morals of Morel Hunting, and I like to play with words. I like to play with language, so you can understand why I'm playing with this one. But I don't know if you've ever had this happen, but people come to me and they say, Paul, the morels right now, they're unbelievable. You can get all kinds. It's just crazy. I'll go out and I can't find any. It's nerve-wracking. It's horrifying. And then you go into town and someone has, like on Grand Avenue, they have a stand and they're selling hundreds of them. Where did they get them? I'm serious. This is upsetting to me. I want to yell at them, but I don't. So here it is. Not that this ever happened to me, but here it is. To hunt morels, I rise early, faithful, a little mesh sack tied to my waist. Hours pass. By every sagging elm, nothing. By every rotted log, nothing. Broken stems and trampings. Reason is now overwhelming my faith. I am sinking into a morel abyss, a quagmire of sporeless emptiness. On the rocky coast, a beacon flashes ahead, a single morel. Scrumptious fruit, light and airy. I carry it home in my hand like a sacred artifact. That afternoon, my neighbor waves me over. Look what I found. Hundreds of morels, bagfuls. Like to buy some? No thanks, I have enough. Dumbstruck, I stagger home to my kitchen where a single morel waits in a small bowl. Dipped in egg yolk, rolled in breadcrumbs, the morel fries to a crispy brown. Meager, but enough to satisfy me. Oh, there's the moon again. The image before it is actually the image of the owl, if you saw that. I've been stalking him for several days, and he was driving me mad. And then finally, the picture I got, the picture that's on the cover of the book, took it from the car. Yeah, how embarrassing is that? But that happens sometimes, and so I was lucky, I guess. And the light at that moment was just spot on. So you don't know. It's just lucky. So this is called Rara avis. This is rare bird. And this is actually a true story. A friend of mine, his name is Fred, he called me one day, many summers ago, and said, you got to come over, I need some help. I'm thinking, what's the matter? Have you fallen in the garage? What's the matter? And he said, no, there's an owl a baby owl, and it fell out of the tree, and I'm not touching the thing. Like, okay. So I went over, and we got the big ladder out, and here it is. Squawking and beak clicking, a young barred owl clings to the base of an oak trunk. Its perceptions of flight is not yet formed. Its body feathers are all down and barely grown. The adults caterwaul and screech, calling out, "My child has fallen down a well." They know innately there is no chance for recovery, no miraculous climb to the nest cavity, no divine reversal of gravity. I ponder my selection, my own intervention in this scheme, passerby or savior, predator or prey, man or God. I leave, gather what I need in return, and in the place of the owlet, I drop an offering of carrion. Taking the owlet in my hand, it is surprisingly light in weight. I climb the tree, delivering it into the opening, and I am now somewhere between earth and heaven. I am now closer. I am now nearer to selflessness. Waiting above me in the heavy branches, the owls are silhouettes against the brackish sky. They are dark, enigmatic angels. Well, that's one from my water garden, and believe it or not, it had just rained. I took the picture, dropped out the background, and that was a photo. Didn't touch it up at all. Well, there was an ant, and I took it off, but that was it. Photoshop's amazing, by the way, and probably 90% of what you see today has been altered, so you have to be very careful. I try not to go too crazy, but just, I guess there's an ethical dilemma there. I've got 2 poems left and maybe a third, and then we'll get back to some fiddling. The next poem I want to read, you probably saw the kingfisher with the bullhead, yes? That's the dragonfly. That's out by our back pond. That only took me 3 hours to take that picture. I just took hundreds and hundreds of pictures, and finally, I got one that I liked. So it's just once again patience. But I was trying to get a picture of a kingfisher for the book, and finally, I got very lucky one day. My brother, who's in military intelligence, he sent me a ghillie suit. That's always a great gift for those guys out there, and that's for being a sniper. Yes, he's like,
What's that?
oh.
That blue, it just was passed. The blue that looks like marbles on top of each other.
Oh, it's a raspberry. It's a raspberry thing. Yep, black raspberry. So I went out to Ada Hayden Park, and I knew where there was a kingfisher. I got in my ghillie suit, got behind something, and waited. And he came in, and it was really interesting. He had caught a bullhead, and he couldn't swallow it down because the spines would keep catching in his beak. So I took picture after picture. I'm thinking, when's this ever going to end? It's unbelievable. And then finally he was able to get it down, and then he flew off. So he was there for about 20 minutes, which is a very long time. Usually those birds are very skittish. And at one point he looked at me like he knew something wasn't right, but he wasn't sure, and then he kind of went back to trying to eat it. And one other part to the story in the poem, when I was at Iowa State, I believe this was in '87, I was standing in a yard watching the first Visha riot. Okay, I was standing watching. I wasn't doing anything bad. And someone from behind me threw a beer bottle at a police officer. Not a good thing, by the way. Something I would never do. And ironically, our daughter now is a police officer, so I can tell you I did not do it, I swear. Next thing I knew, I was being chased by I think it was the National Guard that was there, believe it or not. I think it was. At least that's what I've decided in my mind. All I know is I ran, and I was a good runner back then, not so heavy as I am now, and I was able to escape. And this is what I thought when I wrote the poem. This is called Kingfisher. A scold, a flash of blue. Minnows scatter like criminals into alleyways of cattails. One does not escape. Rings widen, windshield shattering on impact. Victim carried off on a stretcher. Within the blind, I am a bystander, breathless, whispering, "My God, my God." The kingfisher is illumination, a constellation of water droplets, sheen of metal blue, crested, police-sharpened dress, eye mirrored and alert. A bonfire, couches burning, chased through yards and gardens, the police officer huffing and puffing, falling behind in the darkness. I ran and ran, groping for a hide. Behind a wood pile I laid for an hour, mistaken identity. The creature squirms, trying to slide itself loose. Thwack, thwack, eyes closed. The kingfisher smacks the fish against the stick, immobile, delirious, and I am the only one to witness the carnage. Oh, there's the fox again. He keeps following me. The next poem is actually called A Few Secrets, and I worked for years on a biography with a woman named Ann Keller, and she was a Lakota woman. And I was taking Lakota language at Nebraska when I was finishing my PhD, and we became very good friends. And then later I decided I wanted to work on a biography about her life. And so over time, I sort of learned all these sort of things that she kind of gathered, her advice, if you will. And we went up to the reservation together in South Dakota and spent quite a bit of time. And so this is the poem that comes out of that experience. It's called A Few Secrets. And there's some really good advice in here that's really not from me at all, from her, so you can listen to that. So it's not my advice. Here it is. Wild horses run through the night. I am awake, comfortable in bed. The exquisite light of a plum blue moon bleeds magically. A woman old with age, let me secrets with which to live. The world is unknowable, she said, yes, unknowable, except sometimes, tasting wild plums hot from the sun, hearing a certain word spoken as sunlight slants, or touching tips of fingers on tips of fingers. You see, she said, everyone wants the same. I come from a time when horses were untamed, and women were listened to, and plums were candy. People inherit greed, power, lust nowadays. Hold babies, take long walks holding hands, give away and laugh. Nectar is sweet, but plums can be dried to be saved for later, for the harsh winter. Thank you.
Didn't use your full allotment of time. I was expecting to be 145 on this.
Oh, 3 off.
Well, God, I enjoyed that. And then as I was both listening and then between watching the video go on and doing my random thing, I thought, God, if I was a performance artist, like more avant, I would kind of undo what I just did and do the exact set backwards, because I'm going to start out with that waltz. I said, but no, I'm not going to do that. But sometime I might, it would be kind of interesting because, you hear the same poems again and it would be different because it's a different time. We learned that in grad school and beyond. It's like it's the same thing but different. But I will start playing that waltz again. It's Miss Renee's waltz for friends of mine in Louisiana, their daughter. I won't read George W. Bush on Anwar again, but I will read, got to see where it is in here, George W. Bush. I was thinking, when I go places, I read newspapers, so I saw that Karl Rove was just in Iowa City, I guess. There was something that was in the newspaper. Did you see that? That while I'm looking for the other one, I'll read George W. Bush on his relationship with Karl Rove. So it kind of brings local color into this. Me and Karl go back, 30-some years back, before I even got in politics. There were problems, and Karl was there to fix them good. He knows people, knows all the facts, never forgets a thing, knows what a tax cut can do, isn't afraid to go mix it up and get dirty. He's athletic in that way, which is how we see Iraq, hard fought, like the playoffs. The terrorists are rough. I don't have the details myself, but we meet Karl, Dick, Don, Condi, Bill Frist, the rest. We're on top, George. Don't get yourself all worried is what I hear. Karl Rove's whispering, I can trust. To me, that's love. So I'll do, like I say, I was channeling him. So, and I survived. changed but survived. I'll just do one more of these, and then maybe tonight or maybe at the very end I'll do the last poem so you don't have to get the book so you see how it ends. But here's one, George W. Bush on global warming. Summers it gets hot, always has been. Listen, we know scientists disagree on global warming, solar energy, and everything else. The situation may not be what it seems. Hurricanes happen. Hot weather happens. I don't see climate change. I see opportunity. A chance to start one investigation, continue others. I propose panels, a task force, discussion groups of all types. We'd like input. Meanwhile, we'll produce oil as we can. For now, projects of all stripes are underway. We need information. My successor will make the decisions. It's kind of obvious, but but there's no shortage of material, is there? Let's see if it's in this book. I was, I'm going to have to look really quick. It's a poem I don't ever read, but I like reading, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to find it. But I have a pantoum I'm going to look for that's a coyote pantoum, but I don't know if I'm going to find it right away because I never read it. So this poem, people who got here early got cards. I got tons of cards I made. Not tons, I got like 50 to 100. But I got different cards, and I read the Stutterer poem that was once in Flyway. This is a poem that a friend had it on her refrigerator. She said, "You're not supposed to write this poem. Only a woman should write this poem." And I go, well, I wrote it, So it's called But for Wilderness. And and by God, I just found the Coyote Pantoum, too. It was in this book, so I'll read that one after this. So I got to find the But for Wilderness one in here. Or I'll just read it out of the card. But for Wilderness. Childless, she claims her eldest is miles of alpine ridgetop, scramble up a peak like an arrowhead. Her next is winter island of sand, wind, loon, the sudden blunt need to strip and run headstrong into the gray churning. As friends chatter of theirs in kindergarten, she braids fingers over belly, feels herself swell with jungle or desert or both. And there's cards for the taking there. So it's, God, it's in this book. I can't believe it. So I'm going to read the Coyote Pantoum. So Paul read his, and I have another Pantoum actually that I will share later. It's you're talking about like what it's called kvetching in Malay, and I'll have to share that one because it kind of almost the same lines in a sense. But this one, God, we got a coyote in here, so this is good for wild and wilderness. I spit this poem to clear the pain deep within that comes from bone. A game to clear the pain, yes. A sly yelp from bone. A game, animal help, yes. A sly yelp, coyote in the soul, animal help, this coyote call. Coyote in the soul, this body, an ache, this coyote call. I make and remake this body, an ache like a howl. I make and remake myself, my growl like a howl, like coyote. Myself, my growl of history. Like coyote, the pain of history changes men. The pain deep within comes and changes men. I spit this poem. There you go, Pantoum. Thank you for getting me going with this. I'll play a fiddle tune. This is one I made up. When I played that waltz, I kind of do a medley. That one with a tune that's traditional, and I play this one that I made up called Railroad Days, and maybe I'll even do the poem that I wasn't going to do, but it's not really wilderness or wild poem of just of the mind, and I've been doing this one more, so I got this one I recite, so I'll just play this Railroad Day. railroad days for Scott Sparling. The Salt Lake Rail Yard would be our lone trip. Harp told me why I'd bum the country, crisscrossing from Corvallis to Pensacola, Lansing to Pine Bluff. Inside a locomotive, he died nightly in his dreams. The end was like a free falling upward, high dive flight toward the stars. How one night he dreamed to lay flat on the rails, Amtrak Empire builder approaching, its whistle like something out of Genesis. It's that roaring engine that called, harp, change your life. Heaven is everywhere. Next freight train goes. That got me thinking of one that I wanted to do, and then I forgot it. But I'll just do this one that's in this. It's one of the other cards. Whoops, where's that one? This one. The weather poem. I wanted to do this last night, but we didn't have time for everything. And actually, before I get into that, I'll do the first poem in this book. When I mentioned in that first little bit that I had a teacher, you shouldn't write poems. You know, you're a fiction writer. Don't write poems. Well, there was a couple grad students when I was up there. A fellow that Pat Monahan would know, Jared Chadwick, who was very supportive. And then there was another fellow who was only there 1 year named Mark Rosema, who was from Flagstaff, Arizona. And he, especially his poems, we were in a workshop. It was cross-genre. And I was writing my stories, and I didn't read poems, but, you know, it's Jared's poetry, and then Mark, anyway, I'll read this one, because this is kind of like the first poem in my first collection, Letters Sent to Mark Rosema. The snow's over. Holding an envelope, I walk the 30 yards uphill to my mailbox. Everything is heavy, white, except the trees and sky. They're different kinds of silver. I raise the flag, place letter in the box. This letter, addressed to a friend who used to walk miles in snow, and in walking, decided to enter the priesthood. I walk down my driveway. My life keeps changing, I wrote, but now I know where I have to go, and I'm uneasy. Who'd have thought Bush, Alaska had such pull? Passing my cabin door, I decide to walk further and explore how this first winter snow has blanketed the trail, descending into the gorge. And what was kind of interesting about that fellow Mark Rosema is he quit the writing program to go to one of those seminaries. Then he said, they're taking all the mystery out of it. So he quit that, and he went back and got his MFA at Montana. So that's just the way it is. I know, before I get to the one I'm going to read, I got this one that I thought of briefly when Paul was doing, his set on here, and I thought of, this is the difference, one of the differences between Nome, all the way out there on the Bering Sea, and here in Ames, is food's going to be different. So this is an evening of local poetry sponsored by the Nome Arts Council, especially with the weather this past weekend, you'll appreciate. Spread of reindeer, moose, king crab, smoked salmon, whale meat we dip in seal oil, Eskimo food which we wash with cold duck, Budweiser, bottle or two of schnapps. Nothing special here. We speak of snow, wind, the nature of drift. We eat and drink as simply. And here's the one I was going to read. I wanted to read last night. I guess I had to read it sometime while I'm here. December 26th, Wales. Wales is a village in rural Alaska in the Nome region. Yesterday, Christmas. Today, blizzard. You worry, Angel. Uncle Seth won't like the ivory seal because one eye's cracked. Aunt Irma, the fancy stoneware crockpot. Catalog order from Utah. You worry Cousin Isaac will take the next plane to Nome for a drunk, and Cousin Shirley, the flirt, will get pregnant again. You even worry I won't cherish my new gold-handled knife. Angel, let's not argue. All this worry is bad exercise. Leave it for people unsure of their ways. Let's be thankful for our house, our food, this village life. Let's be thankful our love grows like grass and has power over the air. Everything has been provided. We need nothing more. Today, blizzard, time for patience. Tomorrow, less wind, a settling into light. Mary's been very patient, getting everything done. You want to be thanking her for all of this and making this, work out in spite of the last-minute changes that we've had to do, and everybody's been very flexible and good with this. So I got time for just a few more, and I thank you all for attention so far, and that there's going to be like Black Earth this afternoon. Is that like this afternoon? And is there anything else this afternoon, or that's going to be?
That's it. Then Cheryl St. Germain and Dan Vega Madrid tonight.
Yeah, which will be, we're looking forward to, and then slides, and I'll be playing a little bit of fiddle. Yeah. Well, I know I got a few more I want to do, and it's kind of escaping my mind, so I'm just going to play a tune, and then I know I could do the last George Bush poem to kind of get an ending, and there's something else that I probably want to do, something with light, with, do the photography. I think I might want to do something. So play a fiddle tune. I indulge myself playing these tunes I made up. This is one called Burnt Down House, that there's a whole story, there's a whole poem. We don't have 10 minutes for the whole thing. I'll just play the tune, do my little refrain. I had a cat friend whose cabin burned down, lost all his music instruments. I wrote a poem about the instruments sound like really burnt up. That was the genesis of the poem. And then I asked him if he wanted a fiddle tune. He's a musician. He said, sure. If I called Burnt Down House, I said, key of A or key of D? And he said, key of D. So here it is. Burnt down house. Burnt down house. The kids in middle school really like that. They think, oh, we like poetry. I go, that's not the poem. I'll do this poem too before I do the end. I'll do two more and then leave you a last fiddle tune. I kind of, it's in this book is where it is. It's one that people ask, how long does it take to write a poem? And I'm one of these people that I make people angry because I was talking to some of the grad students yesterday. I think it was Tom at lunch, and I was a fiction writer, and I have a certain facility that I'm able to write things quickly. I mean, that's just one of the things. And when I started writing these poems, once I learned some of the, quote, tricks, I mean, some of them, by God, you figure out the line breaks and the stanza breaks and things, and they're just a few sentences long. I mean, I can write these things, and that's why I had to leave Fairbanks. People say, he never edited enough. He write quickly, and I get stuff done, and sometimes they come out okay, and I'm glad about that. But sometimes, like in this one, there was something that didn't work out, and it's like over some years, well, I reduced it to just a joke, because there's a joke in the poem. I want to read it because I like telling this joke at least sometime while I'm here. And then, but the poem itself didn't feel done. I'm not sure it's done yet, but it got to be in this book, but I've been kind of niggling with it for about 8 or 10 years, which sometimes it's like, man, I write the poem, it's in the mail, and it's, it's like getting things done. So it's called Alaska Bachelor. Rejected, and when the joke comes, you'll get it, but I'll give you a little signal. Alaska Bachelor. Rejected by a Sitka woman who flapped like a raven from love to love, whose epic discontent in a state where men were so abundant led her to grumble that, though the odds were good, the goods were odd. And told by another misconnection, a biologist from Fairbanks, that for a man to snatch someone wonderful, he'd need to spot a couple almost but not quite in trouble, then do what dirt it took to pry the two apart. The bachelor rued that given his pathological mildness, he'd never mate, till he woke one morning to the crowbars that had for so long crossed his heart. Tossing off the long, sharp pieces of steel, he felt himself lighten and lighten, and then he rose. So that's, I got to do my joke. I have a few other ones. And yeah, I'll do this one, since it's not the one I was thinking of, but it's in here. It's nice hiking trail poem, and then I'll do the last George Bush poem and play a waltz for you. Difficulty's Last Stand for Rebecca. 3/4 up the mountain, quickly catching myself as I slipped on switchback, I could rejoice how my body had healed. For the first time in 5 years, I was climbing. Felt good, I tell you, putting weight on the knees, feeling the joints springy, letting myself disappear into breath and step. Then I thought of you, the you of language, depth, disease, difficulty, the you of deliverance, who would want me to make this hike holy. For you, I ascended past tree line into the miracle of light. And then here's how the George Bush book ends. There's commentary poems, but I'm just doing all the voice poems, or some of the voice poems. I got a bunch of George W. Bush dream poems, which is kind of, as I kept going and got into it deeper, and thankfully got to the other side, I think, so, stopped it. But it was interesting because, just writing a sonnet, about Abu Ghraib or about Laura Bush or about, you just look at the titles, it's like, once again, there's no shortage. But then when I started writing the ones in his voice and tried to take what he, put myself in, I was, whatever, it is mine. I wasn't there, but I was trying, and I got into these dream poems, which were kind of fun. And then this is the last poem in the book, George W. Bush on his final dream. I was a giant, Laura too. We were so big we crushed the roofs of houses as we walked to buy eggs. We wanted to go home, talked about it almost all the time. My wig made me look like George Washington. A pig squealed a tiny thing like a mouse. A squawk from a small crow then. We were on the ark, but in a drought. Our boat on dry land. Fig trees, little fig trees. Laura took my hand. The boat rolled like a bus, going home at last. Farther south, we jumped out a window. Land smelled better. Horses and sheep, nice high grass to our necks. Huge tomatoes, peas and beans. I was flea-sized. Laura, too. Life's so mean. And I'll play you a last waltz here. All my CDs have some waltzes. I'll play it on the mandolin. Made this up on the mandolin. There's a place called the Museum of History and Art. Summers, they have something called the Artist's Potpourri, where go up to, you don't want to go to Alaska to go to Anchorage. You could be in, Des Moines, Quad Cities, something like that. It's like you don't go to Alaska to go to Quad Cities, but Anchorage is a big city. But you go out, there's where, that's what the wilderness and the wild is. But there are places in Anchorage. There's a really nice museum. Summers they have artists with tables of books and CDs. I was slow one morning with my books and CDs that I had at the time. I had this mail and I made up this waltz called Tom and Sally's Waltz. A couple had a poem for their honeymoon, and I thought they had perfect because she was a fiddle player, he was a writer. And thanks a lot.